I'm going to move on to another question. I feel like some of our answers have come up already, but I'd like to focus it onto this question. How do we make ourselves accountable if issues arise? Be that particularly from the perspective of organizations, but also when I wrote this question in mind, I know that a lot of the people that I work with are not from the LGBT community, and there's a lot of fear there about saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. And yeah, this question's kind of written with them in mind of how do we stay accountable, and what can we do to sort of be good allies, essentially. Go ahead, anyone want to take that question?
I think it's an interesting one, because I got to a point where I used to have a fair amount, I think, of sympathy and kind of relation with people who would come to me and say that. So, for example, if I would work with organisations and they'd be like, "Oh, we're really happy to work together, but we're scared," and I'd be like, "Oh, it's okay." Whereas now I'm very much like, I literally don't care. Like, it's about looking at the motivation behind what they're saying and whether or not it comes from their fragility, and then us having to process whether or not it's actually our job to deal with that. What I've had to really think about is people's motivations, and if people's motivations are pure, then when it does come to potential issues where they would have to be held accountable for, we as a team feel very confident that we can navigate that situation, because everyone has the right motivation behind what they're doing. I think what can tend to happen is when people have like purely financial motivation or clout motivation, and this kind of goes for organizations and people, what can tend to happen is then when things go wrong, they constantly just keep forcing their foot further down their throat, because they don't actually know what they're saying, because their head was never in it in the first place. They were never there for the right reasons. The thing is about making sure that whenever you start anything, or whenever you are going to do something that involves the community or gender diverse people, that you start thinking about it more emotionally and more empathetically, rather than lots of other different factors impacting on what you're talking about.
Would anybody like to continue to expand upon what Jamie said?
I think it's very nuanced, and I think sometimes that gets lost. There's nothing worse than it's like people want to call me in and talk about toilets. You know, it's like, really, I always go, I don't want to get bogged down with toilets, you know, it's my little joke, just to try and kind of move it on a little bit. But I think it is really nuanced. And I think I would kind of like to sometimes, and this might be terrible, but I kind of like to lighten things up a little bit, because I feel like, and I think some of the work I do, because I kind of work with theatre and performance and, you know, television, there is something around being creative about it and kind of challenging people in a different way, so that they're not all thinking it's about legislation and policies and getting it all right. It's like, can we have a bit of fun with it? Like some people said to me, like, how can we support trans people? I was like, why don't you take them out for a nice dinner and show them a good time? You know, that is really flippant. What I'm trying to say is, when you've got a spare room advert up, would you invite that person in to come and view your house? You know, would you go on a date with a trans person? Would you employ? It's like, broaden it out, really, really embrace and be excited about trans people and what we offer, and kind of some of the answers that we have, you know, some of the binaries that we're breaking, you know, and some of the work we're doing. Like, be excited and be drawn into it, rather than going, I need to get it right. It's like, no, just join us and come and be interested.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, for me, I used to do a lot of journalism for like The Independent and The Guardian and that kind of stuff. And I've actually kind of stopped doing that. And I do most of my job is doing drag shows or writing scripts for TV, because I'm much more interested in just telling stories about queer people or trans people without kind of engaging in the argument, as it were, or making it a polemic. You know, I just sort of want to go, this is what a queer life looks like, enjoy them. rather than, you know, because, you know, we're not, trans people are not an essay topic where we can just sit and discuss. And I'm kind of, so for me, especially like to get over how just boring it has been in the media and violent it has been, my response is to just like keep telling stories that are uplifting and funny. I mean, all my stuff has so much comedy, just because people, I think, assume trans lives are really serious and tragic. And of course, there's a lot of difficulty, especially given the British media. But like, you know, when people come to my drag shows, then I've got a drag show called Quran to Queen. And I think a lot of people think, oh God, this is going to be about queer Muslims. It's going to be really tragic. And of course, there's difficult stuff in there, but I like to make people laugh. So I'm like with Kate on this. I'm like, stop taking it seriously. Trans people are human beings. Just, you know, and I'm happy to sort of educate if it's from a good intent. But, you know, someone asked me the other day, what's it like being a queer Arab? Like, what is that as a question? So I was like, oh, what's it being, you know, a straight white woman? I said, and she got quite offended actually, which proved my point. Because you would usually ask a straight white woman, how are you? How was your day? Which would get a much funner response because you could just tell a story rather than like, well, actually, you know, today I've been thinking about which toilet I'm going to pee in. It's like, whatever.
We've actually, with Trans Creative, we've actually started doing trans comedy nights.
Oh, good. I'm happy to hear that.
And also like open mic nights. So it is, you don't even have to be that rehearsed and sophisticated. It's really just, can you get up and do, what have you got? What have you got? Bring it on. Let's just mix up the narrative and let's get rid of that, like you say, that sad trans narrative, because that isn't the case for a lot of trans people. And I think, yeah, we all, you know, we're a minority and we have issues within that. But also we are getting on with our lives, and our stories, like you say, are really rich and worth telling and worth listening to. I did a project with a group in Bristol, and on the what was young trans people in Bristol, and on the way there, I was really struck by how cisgendered, it was men actually, white men, could get on the train and just chat about whatever they wanted to chat about, really freely. And then they got off, and another load of white cisgendered men sat in that train and opened a beer and started chatting about whatever they wanted. And I thought, wow, we just do not have that. Right. We just have not claimed that space yet. So some of my work is about, if we give you that space, it's like I'm some of the thing we're doing is like, be trans like no one is watching. You know that?
I love that.
Like, if you wore your transness on the outside, imagine that. There's somebody we're working with who makes binders to be worn on the outside. So they're so beautiful. They're to be worn on that outside. So I think it's about really celebrating us and not all of us, you know, not just our difficult times, but also our vibrancy and our stories.
I agree.
So to kind of circle back somewhat and bring Saba back in, but we were talking about the role of allies and how can they overcome like self-made barriers in a sense of their own fear. I work a lot with outside of the LGBT community, and there can be a lot of uncertainty and almost like a sort of like don't ask, don't tell kind of culture, it feels like. And it's like, if you don't mention it, I don't have to mention it, and we'll ignore it. So how can these how can people keep themselves accountable, essentially?
Okay.
Do I have time to add like a couple of things? Oh yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just to talk to like similar communities, like talk to people who are also in your communities. Like I have such honest and frank conversations with other queer and trans Desi South Asian people and other trans Muslims just about like what we're doing and our position in other issues that affect our communities as well, like anti-blackness or casteism, and what that looks like in our communities, and just talking about our kind of positionality in it. Something I've really enjoyed doing is talking to white people about whiteness, and having spaces that are just for white people, like around this workshop at a conference like a couple of years ago, a transgender European conference, and so it was just white, trans, non-binary people, and we talked about, well, I said, let's talk about whiteness, let's talk about your white guilt, your white shame, and everything like that, and it went really well. I was really clear with what my position there was. I wasn't going to kind of listen to the guilt and absolve them or anything. It was more like for them to then set up a solidarity network, and I really encouraged them to do that, and I asked them to tell me afterwards, and a few of them had said they set up like white allyship groups or white solidarity groups, and I said that's awesome. Like, I think that's where those conversations need to happen. We don't have to have witnesses to it all the time who are outside the community. Like, just, yeah, let's just talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you everyone. I'm going to start to sort of wrap up now, but I'm going to start with like one kind of outro question for everybody to answer. Could you please tell me what you hope to see in the future for gender inclusion, or what message would you like to send to the trans community or gender expansive community in 20 years from now? Go ahead.
I would like for them to look back at what's happening in the UK right now in the trans conversation, and just be so deeply baffled and like find it ridiculous that the media got so het up about something it didn't need to worry about. I would also like to make sure that people in our position or people with platforms provide enough good uplifting trans content so that younger trans people, because for me my biggest issue was never being able, I mean, I was raised in the Middle East, so I mean the most queer thing I ever watched was Robin Hood. I decided I was gay because I fancied Robin Hood the cartoon fox, and until really, I don't think I'd ever even seen anyone but a white queer person on TV until I was like 25. So I would like to make sure that we're now providing enough content and histories so that in the future they have access to them and just understand that we've always been here. Because it's really important for me to also say that queer Muslims, that was actually what Islam was like centuries ago. You know, there's a real queer history in Islam that's been erased because of British colonialism going into the Middle East and infecting it with homophobia. So it's always really, I think, comforting for queer people to know that we've always been here. And I would just like to pass that on.
Thank you. Would somebody like to go next and remind us to keep it to sort of like 2 minutes max? Thank you.
Was that like 7 minutes?
No.
Yeah. So I'll go next. I think there's a few things that I would like to say. One is that Gandhi, I want to quote Gandhi. Gandhi said, first of all, they will ignore you, then they will laugh at you, then they will fight you, then you will win. And I believe we've been ignored, laughed at, we're being fought at the minute, but we will win. And what I always feel about being trans is that I feel like I kind of failed as a woman and I failed as a man, but I can never fail at being trans. I can only succeed at being trans. I can only get better at being trans. Nobody can tell me how trans can look, sound, be, send me off to voice therapy, do this, do that, how I look, how I dress. I think to be queer and trans for me is really exciting. And I think to not get caught up in the binary, my hope is that the binary doesn't become such a focus, and that everybody has to go to the gender clinic, gender identity clinic. Everybody should be going there and exploring their genders, which it should be free for everybody. Not free, but it should be something that we all take an interest in. And smash the patriarchy. Thank you.
I think it's an interesting one, because I think we're in a time now where the younger generations, in kind of all aspects of social mobility and climate change, like the people that are younger than us are moving those conversations forward. And then I think in a way that, I mean, I personally haven't seen before, but it has that same energy of the generations above us almost. It's almost cyclical. It's coming background and everyone's becoming more powerful. So I think in 20 years, I'd want to see just a massive kind of exploration of empathy. I want that empathy to be so much broader. And I think, unfortunately, in those 20 years' time, there will still be groups of people that are still being persecuted. But I think it's important that hopefully in that time we've moved forward enough to actually look after people a lot better and make sure that these conversations that we're having now aren't happening about trans people, but also aren't happening about other persecuted minority groups out there at the moment. So, I mean, I'll be the ripe old age of 42, which feels old. So hopefully we'll still be going.
Yeah, sure. I think just accept that there are things that we don't know and there are things that we won't know. There are things that we won't like or we won't agree with when it comes to thinking about the trans community and non-binary and gender diverse community. Usually that's maybe the only thing that unifies us sometimes. So I would like to ask you to really interrogate what your solidarity means, what your solidarity looks like for you, and just interrogate the things that make you uncomfortable, and listen to that part of you because it's likely going to tell you something about yourself.
Can I just add one thing that really helps me every day, which is that even subatomic particles don't obey the rules. Every subatomic particle is often in two places at the same time. Literally, like binaries don't work even in like quantum physics. So like if anyone is just rooted to like binary belief, even quantum physics tells them that it's a complete fallacy. I think about that every day.
Thank you for that very uplifting note to finish that on. It's been a whistle stop half an hour. I feel like we've fit a lot in around gender inclusivity. If you would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to tweet the panelists using their handle and the hashtag MP Conference 2020, which I'm sure will be plastered somewhere along the screen. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Manchester Pride for creating this space for us to talk about spaces and stuff. So thank you very much. I will leave it there.